You stand on the shore of the ocean watching the tide come in. You sense the call of the sea beckoning to take you further. You step forward little by little, not knowing what to expect, but expecting more. You keep going as the ocean calls you to enter in to deeper waters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deeper Waters podcast. I am Nick Peters, your host, seeking to bring you the very best in Christian scholarship and apologetics. And today is, of course, no exception. We arrive on Christmas time, and this is going to be our last Christmas show for the month, actually, but this was one I meant to have during the month of the Reformation. It applies to both of them, and that's talking about Mary. Now, Mary is someone that I'm sure a lot of my Protestant evangelical people in the audience are already getting set to go into defensive mode for this one and such, which really is a shame. Because even if sometimes we can think Catholics and Orthodox go too far with Mary, it's a mistake on our end if we go too little. Mary is a very important figure in redemptive Christian history, and we need to talk about her. In order to do that, I brought on the author of the book, Mary for Evangelicals. His name is Tim Perry. He wrote the book while teaching theology at Providence College in Otterburn, Manitoba, Canada. After leaving Providence, he served in parish ministry in Sudbury, Ontario, and continues to do so in Shawville, Quebec. He is an adjunct professor at St. Paul University in Ottawa, Ontario, and Trinity School for Ministry in Ambridge, Pennsylvania. Dr. Perry, welcome to the Deeper Waters podcast.
Thanks very much, Nick. It's good to be here.
Now, my audience doesn't know who you are. Tell us how you got to be doing what you're doing.
Well, I went to my denominational Bible college back in 1988, ostensibly for a year to please my mom, basically. And while I was there, God called me to ministry, and it wasn't a vision or a Damascus Road kind of experience, but I don't know how else to describe it other than to say God called me. So I was there for 3 years. I did my BA, and then I went to seminary in Toronto. And upon completing my MDiv, it was clear to me that I was not ready to be in a church full-time on my own, or even to be an associate minister. So under the encouraging of a couple of my professors there, I applied for a PhD study and completed that in 1996 from Durham University, and then taught theology for a decade. When that ended, I was ordained in the Anglican Church of Canada and served in Sudbury for a few years. And now I'm in Shawville, Quebec, where I pastor actually the church I grew up in. So I kind of, it's been a circuitous route, but I've come full circle.
Now, do you think the description I did give as far as accurate, that unfortunately for many evangelicals, as soon as they hear the name Mary, they can start thinking defensively?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Well, because since the third generation of the Reformation, she's kind of been the lightning rod for all the solas, you know, where a classical Protestant will talk about sola fide. Mary is held up as cooperating with grace, where a classical Protestant will talk about sola scriptura. Mary will be held up as sacred scripture and tradition, scripture and sacred tradition, certainly around the modern dogmas of Immaculate Conception and bodily assumption. Mm-hmm. Where a classical Protestant would say solus Christus, in Christ alone. Mary is held up as a co-redemptrix, is the kind of the hot button title. So, we've had at least 450 years of getting getting used to being defensive. So it's kind of become the default reaction, rightly or wrongly. So I don't. I've met with a fair bit of defensiveness, and I don't find anything wrong with it. At first blush, it's kind of a natural reaction. You just have to kind of come to expect it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think I also need to ask you then the question that is often asked in your book. So how's Mary doing today?
I think she's just fine.
Mm-hmm. You're not so sure if you are, though, right?
Well, I wrote that book 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that part of the book was written right at the end of a really intense sabbatical project, and I was quite tired at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
I often, when I was teaching in the full time, I used to joke with my colleagues that, people who think that sabbaticals for academics is a year off for them to rest, really don't know what a sabbatical is. I certainly never worked harder in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a pretty big book. It was well over 600 pages in the original typescript.
Mm-hmm.
And I put it together in about 10 months. So it was a lot of long days.
And having gone through the book, it seems like you cover pretty much every period in church history. So I'm going, how did you manage to do all this research,
Well, I had access to a really fine library. Mm-hmm. I was a sabbatical scholar at St. Paul University in Ottawa, which is a pontifically chartered Catholic university in Canada. It's run by the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. And it is far and away the best theological library under one roof in the country. Toronto School of Theology, I think, has a better library. The problem is it's split amongst the member colleges. St. Paul has everything handy under one roof. And being a Catholic university, it had a really well-developed Mary section. So I was right at home there. It really was great, and their late professor of theology, Kevin Coyle, he taught historical theology there for years. Died just a couple of years ago. He was tremendously helpful. He had an abiding interest in Mary and in ecumenical dialogue. And he was just a really, really helpful guide to me through tons of material. So I feel, very, very strongly that it was God who got me to the right place at the right time to meet with the right people. And it was a great project. I worked really hard, but I had a wonderful time. It wasn't a chore by any stretch.
Now, you did mention all the solas of the Reformation and such. So when you write this work, you still want to stay in the tradition of the Reformation and such.
Yeah, I do. Yep. I do. I'm a Wesleyan church pastor, so I'm probably not reformed enough for a lot of your listeners, and that's okay. But I still count myself in the evangelical fold. Interestingly, the title was not my choice. The title was the choice of the publisher. I wanted to call it Our Lady 2, and they thought that title was a little too esoteric, so they went with this title. I don't know if that title helped or hurt the book in terms of sales, but it did kind of stamp it in terms of its intended audience for sure.
I don't think you have to worry about not being reformed, such. I'll tell you that personally, I consider myself a 0-point Calvinist, in fact, so I'm not totally sold on things.
Fair enough.
Why did you start writing a book about Mary, of all people? What made her such a point of interest?
Well, excuse me, I'm fighting a cold. It was a confluence of a few reasons. One of the reasons was personal, and that is my dad's side of the family are all French Roman Catholic from Quebec. My paternal grandfather moved out of the family home when he was 12 and went to work because his family was basically too poor to feed everybody. And from that point on, it's not so much that he was estranged from his family as he just had to go where the work was, and that meant going to when you're 12, that meant working at local farms. So because of his having to leave home early and go to work, he had to learn English. He eventually experienced what we'd call an evangelical conversion. Started attending church, and after he married my grandmother, they raised their family in the Wesleyan Church in rural Quebec in the Ottawa Valley. And as a result, I've got a whole raft of cousins that I rarely see who are separated from me by language and by religion. And that always made it, a little bit fascinating. Whenever I'd end up at the parish church, that the family parish church in Aylmer for a funeral or whatever, it was always kind of fascinating because it was a whole way of life that a large chunk of my family participated in that I knew nothing about, and that my grandparents and parents were quite happy for me to know nothing about it. And that made it all the more attractive. So that part of it has always kind of been with me in my growing up years. And so when I had the opportunity for a sabbatical, there was a personal itch that I could take some time to scratch. The second reason was largely professional. To get a sabbatical application accepted, you had to present a project that had potential for publication, that would represent a unique contribution to scholarship, all the usual kinds of things. And this seemed to be that project. It was accepted by InterVarsity Press. It was accepted by my school. And so it just kind of worked out that would be the project I would work on. And from there, getting the place as a sabbatical scholar at St. Paul University really sealed the deal. So those three things kind of worked together to make the project happen. And it's still bearing fruit. I wrote the book 2004, 2005. Was published in 2006, so it's older now. I mean, as we were talking before in our email exchanges, it's been out of print. For a long time now. I think it went out of print in maybe 2010 or a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. But it still pops up. I'm doing your podcast today, and thank you again for the invitation. Mm-hmm. I know it's regularly used as a textbook at Wheaton College. Interestingly enough, in their art history department, not in their Bible and theology department. So that's kind of fun. But I know it pops up there regularly. So it has a small kind of niche market. People are still interested in it, and it's certainly bearing fruit for me. So it was a good project.
Yeah, I got interested in it because my wife has been exploring Eastern Orthodoxy lately and seriously considering it. And I've got a decent grasp of church history. I understand what's meant by referring to Mary as a Theotokos, for instance.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm looking at the way Mary is treated, and I'm thinking, I think this is a bit over the top and such. So I started doing some research on Mary. One of the first books I came across from a Protestant perspective was Scott McKnight has written one recently on Mary.
Yeah.
The Real Mary, and in it he mentioned your book, and so I thought that could also be a good one to get on here and such. Mm-hmm. And like I said, we tried to get you on before, but there was a death every single time. So thankfully, no one was dying this time.
Yeah, no one died this time. Yeah. I do have a couple of people in hospital, but it looks like they're going to recover. The big thing was my father's death. So it wasn't just random, or kind of the usual parish ministry stuff. It was a pretty significant event in our family that derailed things. But I appreciate your persistence, and we're able to go ahead with it now.
Well, my condolences to you and your loss personally there too.
Thank you.
Now, when we do talk about Mary here, still, I mean, like I mentioned the term Theotokos there, and I think that's an interesting one because, I mean, ultimately I'd like to start with Gospels, but the term Theotokos is something that really did lead to the writing of the book, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Theotokos is the watershed in terms of the development of Marian piety and doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting word because, like the word Trinity, it's not found in the Bible. And unlike the word Trinity, it has a pretty extensive non-Christian or pre-Christian history. And that kind of spooks some people. I don't know that it should, but it does. It comes into Christian vocabulary through the language of piety, through the language of worship, but it's adopted into orthodoxy as a Christological title. It's adopted in order to say something true, preserve something true about the person of Jesus, and that which is preserved in the adoption of the title by the Council of Ephesus in 431 is the unity of Christ's person. So Mary did not bear the human nature of Jesus, which is what the other side, if you want, was arguing for. They preferred the term Christotokos for her. And the counter argument was women don't bear natures, women bear children. And Mary's son, Mary's child was God. So she's not the mother of his human nature. She's the mother of his one person in two natures. And so she is rightly described as the mother of God. When that title is adopted by the Council of Ephesus, of course, while it's adopted for Christological reasons, it also cements, the previous century's growth of Marian piety and devotion, and continues to set its trajectory, ensuring that it will continue on into the future. And one of the things that I wanted to do in the book was kind of document how, not simply how Theotokos serves as a watershed, but I wanted to document the prehistory that leads up to it with respect to Mary, and then the flowering of Marian doctrine and devotion that takes place afterwards as a result of it. Mm-hmm. One of the really interesting things that I discovered in my research is that with respect to Theotokos, John Henry Cardinal Newman, the great Anglican convert to Catholicism in the 19th century, and John Calvin had surprisingly similar opinions. Both agreed that Theotokos was adopted to say something true about the person of Jesus, and affirmed the title as a result, though Calvin didn't want to use it. He was quite uncomfortable with it, but both affirmed that it said something true about Jesus. And so it was a legitimate part of the tradition. But Calvin thought that it brought with it all kinds of problems that needed to be corrected with respect to Mary. And Newman argued that was kind of perpetual meddling. If you started, you'd never really get stopped. And so the task of the theologian was kind of to let piety develop on its own, and only when it really went off the rails should the theologians and the church intervene. So they had similar views of kind of the abuses that came alongside with the title, but very different responses to it.
Yeah, understood. I mean that I can see why some people might have a problem with the term Theotokos today, and definitely not one that was ever intended by it. Like, if I go up to you and I start saying Jesus is God, well, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that. But to someone on the outside, they might be thinking, oh, does that mean Jesus is the Father? Or something like that. And that's not at all what we mean. And sometimes I think when people hear the term God bearer, they might think, wait, God's eternal. How could Mary give birth to God? And that was never what was meant by the term.
Yeah, no, it's not, and but she is the mother of his person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not just we're not free with respect to Jesus to divide him into a human half and a divine half, only part of which is Mary the mother. He's one person in two natures, united without division, without separation, without mixture, without confusion. As Chalcedon would put it, 20 years after the Council of Ephesus. If that is who he is, if he is one person in two natures, Mary's the mother of the person, not the mother of the nature, because women don't give birth to natures; they give birth to babies.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's time now then that we start going straight into the scriptures here, and I'd say we're going to begin with the Gospels. That's a bit short-sighted, actually, because chronologically, the Pauline epistles come before the Gospels. Now, if you go for the Pauline epistles, though, and you say, I want to find out all about the historical Jesus that I can, and that was your only source, you wouldn't even know his mother's name through that.
That's right. Yeah. The earliest strata of the New Testament is the Pauline epistles, and in the Pauline epistles, Mary's depiction is very sparse. She makes an appearance in Galatians 4:4. Mm-hmm. Christ is born of a woman born under the law, mm-hmm. and that's about it. There is the curious remark. I think it's in 1 Timothy that women will be saved through childbearing, mm-hmm. But that's pretty obscure. Some people see there, and I actually don't talk about this in the book, but some people see there a Marian, possible Marian referent. I don't know if there is one or not. It's a lot. I think it's a lot to hang on one verse, but. Even though Mary makes only one very small appearance in Paul, the theme that's introduced there is one that continues throughout the scriptures and well into the fathers, and that is, Mary is the guarantor of the full humanity of the Lord. Mm-hmm. Christ was born of a woman, born under the law. The sentence functions analogously to Paul's declaration in Romans. The son of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God by the resurrection of the dead. Mary functions to guarantee the full humanity, and indeed Jewish humanity, of Jesus. It's about establishing his humanity and his messianic credentials. Pardon me. And that becomes a theme that comes up not only in the New Testament, but runs all the way through the early fathers in particular, where the major opponent was not conceiving of Jesus as divine, but conceiving of Jesus as a human being. And so, some of the early Gnostics could speak of Mary as a tube through which the divine Christ passed uncontaminated. And the fathers insisted, no, she really was his mother. And so Galatians 4:4, among other places, but Galatians 4:4 figures quite highly in that kind of argument. It's about guaranteeing the humanity of Jesus. When we meet Christ, we meet the man who is God, not just a God who looks like us, but a God who is in every way one of us.
Well, I think it's interesting you refer 1 Timothy 2, because just last week on here, I interviewed Richard Schenck, who wrote the book The Virgin Birth of Christ, which I do affirm my listeners. And he has that I have a whole joke series about that. And if anyone wants to know what's going on when I say it, just go to my blog and do a search for "I affirm the virgin birth," and there's a whole post on it there. But he has that very same interpretation. 1 Timothy 2 is an Eve Mary kind of thing and such. So if anyone's looking to see more about what Dr. Perry's saying about a possible Marian reference there, I recommend listening to that show there from last week. Let's say something about Israel. I mean, why do you think there is such a silence in the Pauline epistles? I mean, since I talk about the virgin birth, there are so many people who do say, well, geez, why didn't Paul talk about these things if he believed in them?
Well, my suspicion is, he had more pressing things on his mind.
Mm-hmm.
You think of, when I came to you, I resolved to know Christ and him crucified, Corinthians. I think he was so eager to plant the community, get the community established, and go on to the next one, that the kind of the pre-passion, sorry, the pre-passion and resurrection of our Lord really wasn't the center of his teaching.
Mm-hmm.
He was consumed with evangelization, and certainly in the New Testament, the reflection on Jesus' childhood and early years simply comes later. So I expect, and I'm happy for someone who's a Pauline scholar, which I'm not, to correct me, but I expected it. Just Paul simply had other more pressing evangelistic and pastoral needs, and he was always on the go, and simply wasn't interested in setting down a gospel.
Yeah.
Not least because there were gospel fragments already being circulated that Paul draws from. You think of the Christ hymn in Philippians, and that he refers to. So he's kind of letting other people do what needs to be done while he's got his own sense of mission. That would be my guess at an answer, anyway.
Well, my own answer also, you can see what you think of this, and I guess this explains the whole virgin birth thing. I was involved in a Facebook thread with a friend once, dialoguing with someone who's agnostic about these kinds of matters and saying, well, don't you think Paul would have mentioned if he believed in it? And I made the point that, look, many of us attend our own church services, and our pastors are very orthodox, and they believe in the virgin birth, and they don't come right out and say every single sermon, hey, I believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. I affirm the virgin birth. They don't have to. It's part of the background knowledge. And to make a joke about how ridiculous it would be, we started saying, I affirm the virgin birth in pretty much every single reply we made. So the whole thing is meant to show how ridiculous this kind of thing is, that it was really part of the background knowledge of what was known at the time, and Paul does not write a circumstantial letter to go into background knowledge. So that's my take on it.
There you go. That seems to me to be entirely plausible. Like I say, you might want to have a Pauline scholar on sometime to press him or her a little bit further, but that sounds right to me. Paul is just. It's not a question of whether he knew or he didn't know. It's just he has different concerns in mind when he's putting his letters together.
Now, let's move on to the Gospels, which I think most people think this is where the real meat is to be found on Mary. Now, chronologically, most scholars will say Mark was the first one written. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm not going to get into that one, but it doesn't really matter. We're going to have to go for all the meat. Now, if we looked at Mark, Mary isn't entirely on the side of the angels in Mark in our minds, is she?
No, she's. I in the book I call her a well-intended opponent of the Gospels, and I think in what Mark's major theme is the cost of discipleship. That following Jesus is going to make some pretty serious demands on you. And certainly, I think that's true of the document simply as a piece of literature, and that certainly harmonizes with what most scholars agree is kind of the history to Mark, which is, it's probably at its core the memoirs of Peter, and it is put together by Mark shortly after Peter's death in Rome to a community that really is at a point of existential crisis. Because under Nero, the early Christian leaders in Rome are being executed. So, Mark's theme is one of costliness, that following Jesus is worth it, for lack of a better phrase. But until the end, it can be quite costly and quite painful. And one of the ways in which Mark develops that theme is to show that even Jesus' closest relatives, his mother and his brothers, misunderstand him. They get him wrong. They think he's crazy. They think that he might even be at some level demonically deluded or controlled, and so they need to bring him home. They need, and the word there, those from Nazareth came seeking to restrain him, and I'm working from memory here, but I think that's what the text says. The word restrain is the same word that Mark uses to describe what Herod did to John the Baptist in putting him in prison. So it's not a there, Jesus, it's time to come home now. They're going to bring him home, and they're going to, prematurely end his mission by silencing him. But what makes them different from, say the Pharisees or the Sadducees or whomever is opposing Jesus is that they're doing it with good reason. They misunderstand Jesus. They misunderstand his message. They're afraid for him and for themselves because of the attention that's being drawn by Jesus to himself and to them, and for the sake of the good of the family, they want to bring him home. And so I think what Mark is doing there literarily is showing how even the most precious bonds can be strained by faithfulness to the gospel, and even the most important people in our lives may be confused or radically misunderstand what it means for us to be a follower of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Mary and her sons and such, the Pharisees early on in the gospel are already planning on how they're going to kill Jesus, and that certainly isn't on the agenda of Mary. They're wanting to still act in love and such, but they probably, I think, suspect Jesus is kind of shirking his familiar responsibilities because he's the firstborn son. He has to be able to provide them, and where if he's a Messiah, he needs to be told what the Messiah is really supposed to be doing.
Yeah, could well be. I mean, it's interesting that in the text itself, the whole, there's the kind of the two sets of bad guys. There's the members of Jesus' family, and there's those from Nazareth, and a group of Pharisees from Jerusalem. And the family thinks Jesus is out of his mind. The Greek word is ekstasis. He's outside of himself. In other words, he's probably being controlled by another spiritual power. The Pharisees amp up the charge. He's in league with Beelzebul. It's by the prince of demons that he casts out demons. And Jesus' response to the Pharisees is far harsher than his response to his family. His response to the Pharisees who have come to check him out from Jerusalem is that a house divided against itself cannot stand. So I can't be casting out Satan by the power of Satan. And if you don't recognize by whose power I'm doing this, then you've sinned against the Holy Spirit, and that's a sin that's unforgivable. It's a matter of the will. It's not that you cannot repent and believe; it's that you will not repent and believe, and because you will not be forgiven. It's an unpardonable sin. And then the response to his family members is, whoever does the will of my Father is my mother, my sister, and my brother. So the door is open to them in a way that it's not to the other enemies of Jesus, but it's open on the same condition that everybody else is, right? The door of repentance and faith is the way in which we enter into Jesus' family, and that's true for members of Jesus' bloodline, for lack of a better word. It's as true for them as it is for anyone else. It's only those who will not believe, like the religious leaders, who are excluded from the invitation.
Yeah, I do want to give a little brief aside, since you mentioned the passage about the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, because I know there are many Christians who often struggle with this.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're kind of saying also is it's not the kind of thing that can be done today, and Christians who are panicked that they've committed blasphemy against the Holy Spirit probably shouldn't be panicking about that.
I think that's absolutely right. I had a couple of students way back when I was teaching in my office, quite concerned that they might have committed blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And my answer to them is an answer I continue to believe, and that is, if you're worried that you've done it, you haven't done it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's about a matter of the will. It is knowing and understanding the gospel and willfully, deliberately, in an ongoing way, rejecting it.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, your will is so oriented against grace that you seal your own fate. You so consistently choose against the Lord's intervention that you become a person who cannot respond to the gospel.
Yeah, I know that wasn't the point of your book and such, but I did want to mention a brief aside there for sort of a pastoral purpose for our listeners. But let's move on then to Matthew here. Now, Matthew tells us a little bit more, and he also gives us a very interesting genealogy, doesn't he?
He does. Matthew's all about establishing Jesus' messianic credentials, and he's doing it in a really, I think, sensitive kind of way. When Matthew's written, it's shortly after the fall of the temple, and that means that those sects of early Judaism that were oriented towards land, like the Zealots, or the temple itself, like the Sadducees, those Jewish schools of thought that said, authentic Judaism resides in being in the promised land or in proper temple observance. Well, when the Jews are dispersed by Vespasian after AD 70, those ways of being Jewish simply have no longer any reason to be, because the Jews are dispersed from the land and the temple has been destroyed. So, arguing about the authenticity of temple observance really becomes irrelevant. So what's left? Well, what's left are those Jews who say authentic Judaism finds itself in the synagogue and in keeping Torah, the Pharisees, in other words, and those Jews who say, this itinerant rabbi from Nazareth was the Messiah, the followers of the way that they're called in Acts, the early Christians. And so what we have in Matthew is an argument about which way of being Jewish is the authentic way of being Jewish. And Matthew is, more than the other Gospels, an apologetic gospel. He wants to present the gospel in such a way that his fellow Jews who are not believers in Jesus will be willing to consider Jesus' messianic claims. And the biography, the genealogy, I should say, is part of that. And he makes a point of including, these women with kind of scandalous stories in the biblical record, to say, God has incorporated scandal right into the messianic line. So you can't be scandalized at Mary and not be scandalized for very similar reasons by Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba. There's all kinds of questionable things going on in those stories. And so I think he deliberately includes those names, not so much to vindicate Mary, as to kind of create a little bit of breathing room to say, at least consider Mary. And then the means by which you consider Mary is through the eyes of Joseph, who is the righteous man. And if Joseph takes up Mary's cause, and Joseph is a righteous man, then you as a righteous person like Joseph, you should be willing to consider Mary too. So I think there's a kind of an evangelistic and apologetic argument going on, even in the way Matthew constructs his genealogy. He's not just about narrating history, but he's using history for an evangelistic or apologetic purpose there.
And something that I would about also is that when we had Richard Schenck on last week talking about the virgin birth, one of the things we talk about is that a lot of people were think that comes from paganism and such, and that could have been a charge that was thrown out by Jewish opponents of Jesus, and say because if Jesus had been perceived as illegitimate, one of the last things Matthew would just want to make up, I think, would be and say, well, he was going to do away, but it was God who did it. Yeah, it was God and such. It's not the kind of thing you would make up. It's kind of saying, yeah, Mary was either immoral or she got raped, but instead of admitting those, we're just going to blame God for it.
Yeah, it's if Matthew is writing many, many decades later and essentially composing a piece of theological fiction, he could have told the story in such a way to make it much less scandalous. And I think that he narrates the story the way he does testifies to the relatively early nature of the story, the widespread acknowledgement amongst followers of Jesus and not followers of Jesus that the conception and birth of Jesus has some serious question marks around it. And both the early Christian and non-Christian Jewish audiences who received Matthew would have been horrified by any kind of co-option of pagan mythology. Whether we're talking about Mithras or Osiris or whomever. It just simply wouldn't have flown. So I think the gospel is written in such a way because it reflects, the convictions of an early Christian community, an early Jewish Christian community. That Jesus' conception and birth was in some way miraculous. And, even in the first century, people knew where babies come from, and virginal conceptions and births were not common. They recognized that this was potentially scandalous. This was potentially an opportunity for ridicule. Certainly in later Jewish writings that speak of Mary being raped by a Roman soldier, that ridicule was taken up, and I think Matthew is saying to his Jewish but non-Christian audience, well, hang on a second. Mary is not the first woman with a question mark after her name in the messianic line. Look at Tamar, look at Rahab, look at Ruth, look at the wife of Uriah. If God can work in all of those situations and incorporate those women into the foremothers of the Messiah, then at least give me a chance to tell my story about Jesus, the son of Abraham, the son of David, and so on. So that's what I think is going on there. It's not just a straightforward narration of history. It's history being put to an evangelistic purpose.
Yeah. We could keep going on, but we do have to get to the other Gospels. And, we're going to have to go through the rest of church. Oh, no, apologies. We'll have to go to the rest of church history in about an hour's time or so. It shouldn't be too big of a problem here. But how about Luke? Now, it kind of surprised you said Matthew is probably the most apologetic of the Gospels, because I would have thought Luke was the most apologetic, since he's the one talks especially about going and getting eyewitnesses and such. But then I thought maybe it's because I'm looking at more from an evidential Gentile way of thinking instead of a Jewish way of thinking. But what does Luke tell us about Mary?
Well, I think Luke is just writing as a historian, a first century historian. So he's writing to Theophilus. Whether Theophilus is a literary construct or a real person, we don't know. But he's either just converted or on the cusp of becoming a Christian. And so Luke says, I've resolved to set down an orderly account of the things that have happened among us. And to do so, I consulted eyewitnesses and servants of the word. So, and then comes, the wonderful stories in Luke 1 and 2 of the Annunciation to Zechariah, and then to Mary, and then the births of John the Baptist and Jesus. And so I think, again, like Matthew, Luke is not engaging in free-flowing mytho-theological composition. I think he's setting down what he was told. And it's really, really interesting to me that a large part of what he was told would have been known only to Mary and her immediate family. And so one of the eyewitnesses and servants of the word, one of the streams, if you want, that Luke taps there, is a Marian stream that certainly predates him. And if his gospel comes into its own by around 80, the older I get, the earlier I think the gospels come into their own. But if we stick with 80, he's drawing on well-established Christian traditions that have their roots in Mary herself. And so, the ancient Christian tradition that Luke actually consulted Mary as one of the eyewitnesses, it might not be as far-fetched as some early modern biblical critics would have thought.
Yeah, I wouldn't really have any problem with that whatsoever. And I think it's interesting that Matthew's gospel seems to focus so much on Joseph. Luke's gospel does focus a whole lot more on Mary.
Yes, absolutely. Luke has a very almost woman-centered telling of the story. So like even the phrase, in the 6th month, an angel came to a virgin in Nazareth, espoused to be married, whose name was Mary. Well, the 6th month refers to Elizabeth's pregnancy, which is just it's not the way he usually dates things. Even in that part of the story, he cites emperors or governors or what we would say is kind of traceable, dateable, independent pieces of evidence. But when he gets to the guts of the story, he has this very woman-centered way of telling it, which suggests to me that he's drawing on a woman-centered tradition that goes back to Mary herself.
All right, so now moving on to John, and this is something that hadn't occurred to me until I read your book. That we think where it seems like Mark doesn't give us, or wherever Pauline epistles, they don't tell us a lot. Mark tells us some stuff. He seems to present Jesus as, or Mary as, a well-intending opponent of Jesus. So it looks like then by the time we get to John, things are going a bit better. But then when we get to John, if all we had was John, we wouldn't even know Mary's name again.
That's right. She's just woman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think John more than, sorry, I'm really sorry about my cough.
Okay.
I think John more than the other evangelists is, I think he is interested in giving us a reliable, historically reliable account of the gospel story. But he's also so interested in the symbolic, and Mary becomes a symbol for the faithful community. I think in John, I think that the trajectory's already started in Luke, but certainly in John, she's not so much a person in her own right as she is in Luke. Really, only in Luke is she a three-dimensional character. In John, she's a symbol for the faithful community, both at in the two places where she appears, at the wedding in John 2, and then at the crucifixion. In those two places, she's a symbol for the believing community. I think that's how she works in the gospel there.
Now, a little brief thing about the whole incident at Cana and such. Do you think Jesus was being disrespectful to Mary there?
No. No. I think the whole thing is so theologically freighted that to try to penetrate through that into Jesus' psychological state is asking way more than what the text can or intends to offer us. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's a bit of a misguided question. I think far more interesting is, his initial response to his mother, "Woman, my hour is not yet." And the hour it's repeated again at key points throughout the gospel. Mm. And in Mary's response to Jesus' apparent rejection of her request is to go to the servants and point to Jesus and say, whatever he tells you to do, do it. And then he performs miracles. I think, it's the idea. It's the ideas present in the story. Like, you have the first mention of Jesus' hour. We have the 7 stone water pots filled up to the brim that become the choice wine that's given at the end. This is the first of the signs through which Jesus revealed his glory and his disciples believed. Those are the things that I think really matter. And I think we access those things by reading the gospel as a piece of literature rather than as a piece of psychology and trying to ask, what's going on between Jesus' ears. Because I don't think John is really interested in that. I think he's doing other things.
Mm-hmm. Well, one other reference we have to go from the New Testament and think about Mary, because there's not much even in Acts. She's among the early believers and such, and that's all we can really say. One reference that could be debated some is Revelation 12 talking about Mary?
I think it is. I believe so even more strongly now than I did when I first wrote the book. Certainly in its canonical context, as part of the Christian New Testament, you simply cannot not see Mary there. But again, like in the gospel, and I'm not necessarily equating the authors here, but like in the Gospel of John, she's the woman there is overlaid with all kinds of symbolism that I spell out in the book. She's She's Eve. She's the faithful people of God, persecuted, Old and New Testament. I think she's Mary. It's all there. There might even be some pre-Christian reference to, not to paganize the gospel, but to show that from always the Gentiles have been included in God's saving plan. I think all of that comes in Genesis 12. So we have a really rich symbolic portrayal there, but I don't think you can. I don't think we have permission, if that makes sense, to not see Mary or to deny Mary her place there. It's simply, as part of the Christian canon, it's simply too obvious.
I think there could be some people, I mean, I'm not totally sold on Mary being the woman in there, but I think there could be some people who say, well, okay, but if I go with that, does that mean I have to take on, like, say, all the Marian dogmas of the Catholic Church at that point and such?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, there's nothing in Revelation 12 that requires immaculate conception or bodily assumption or any of that. Revelation 12 is itself a piece of apocalyptic literature, which is highly symbolic, and so how it refers is a really complicated question. So to see Mary in Revelation 12 doesn't necessarily commit you to a Catholic or an Orthodox capital O view of things.
Well, before we start going into our next section, starting looking at church history, I like to remind everyone, I'll go ahead and do it now. You're listening to the Deeper Waters podcast. I've got my guest, Dr. Tim Perry, with us this week, talking about his book, Mary for Evangelicals, some of our Christmas theme and such. So next week, we're not going to be doing more Christmas for now. We're going to go and talk about what is an obviously light subject to discuss. We're going to be talking about slavery in the Old Testament. And I'm going to have Dr. Richard Averbeck on talking about slavery. What was it? Why would God use slavery? Is it anything like what we see in, say, the Civil War time period and such? So if you get a lot of questions from your skeptical friends about slavery in the Old Testament, you need to be listening to this episode. But now let's go to back to our show with Dr. Perry talking about Mary for Evangelicals. Now, how early on is it before we start seeing in church history development of doctrines that many of us Protestants can say, okay, now we're starting to get questionable? I mean, I meant things like, say, perpetual virginity and things like that and such.
Well, I think perpetual virginity it really is always there. And it's not until the advent of modern biblical criticism that it's seriously denied. It comes up earlier. It comes up in the 4th, 5th century, and it's opposed by Ambrose and Jerome. Pardon me. But it's apart from that, it's really not until the modern era that it comes into question. And, certainly for Protestants, even amongst the first generations of the Reformation, the idea that Jesus was Mary's only son wasn't seriously questioned. Certainly Luther believed it. Even up to the Wesleys, they believed it too. So the notion that Protestants rejected the perpetual virginity of the Blessed Virgin Mary is simply not true. It's really only into the modern era that it comes to be rejected. I'm inclined to think maybe we've been a little too hasty in our rejection of it.
Yeah, I'm someone who's still very skeptical about it, and I think it's kind of interesting how it looks like things have come kind of in a reversal. So what's at the beginning we were saying, well, look, here are even some Protestants who hold the doctrine, Now, when my wife began this search, we did talk to a Catholic priest, and something he told us is, oh, yeah, in those days, in New Testament times, it was common for a Jewish man to marry a woman to provide security for her, never intending to have sex with her. So I have never heard of this practice. And so go look it up. It was a common practice. I talked to my ministry partner first, who's read a lot more about New Testament than I have, and he hadn't heard about it. I talked to my father-in-law, who's a New Testament scholar. He hadn't heard about it. I emailed Craig Keenor, who's been on my show a few times before, and he's definitely a well-researched New Testament scholar, and he hadn't heard anything about it. And he talked about John Meyer, author of A Marginal Jew, who's actually a Catholic New Testament scholar. And so I emailed him, and he said this priest is probably going from a proto-evangelium of James. And he did tell me that there are a lot of Catholic scholars today who are questioning the doctrine of perpetual virginity based on research into the New Testament and such, and that they're actually being given some leeway by the Catholic Church. So it seems like we've kind of made an interesting shift in how things are perceived.
I mean, it could be. I have not done any kind of historical research into marriage practices beyond, what I studied in seminary, and we relied a lot on Joachim Jeremias. My only caution would be, if we rely on kind of the general rules to tell us what happened in this specific instance. We don't do that with the death and resurrection of Jesus, because J.D. Crossan is very right to say that in terms of the general rules, crucified criminals were thrown in common graves and their bodies were eaten by dogs. And the reason why there was no body of Jesus was because that's what happened to it. We're dealing with, possibly unique cases in history. Anyway, all that to say, I'm uncomfortable with, wanting to pick a rule that serves our side when we're talking about Mary and Joseph, but actually works against us when we're talking about the resurrection. I think we're dealing with the uniqueness of the situation. All I can say is in terms of history, the notion that Jesus was Mary's only son is there from the earliest times, and it's held even by people who, like Jerome, called the Protevangelium of James a collection of old wives' tales, and that's just about a quote. Jerome, whether you like his exegesis or not, Jerome wants to defend the virginity of Mary on the good Protestant basis of Scripture alone. And I think we need to take that seriously. So anyway, that's about all I have to say about that. I think.
I think at this point, we could say that this can be something that evangelicals can, as we often do, have freedom to agree and disagree on and such, but it should be a topic of debate that we should also be sure to say, well, I say this too, as when we were skeptical, we shouldn't say, well, if Catholics and Protestants believe in it, though, by God, we obviously can't. Right. If Catholics and Orthodox, we obviously can't. We need to look and say, okay, what's the evidence for this position and how well does it hold up? That is what good Protestants are supposed to do, to go and say what the Protestant cry was to the sources. What do they say?
I think so. I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the problems is one strand of evidence that we lately have consistently overlooked is the ancient nature of this belief. This is not, a pagan accretion that gets smuggled into Christian piety centuries later. This is there from the beginning. It's not It's not recorded in Scripture, but it's there from the beginning, and it doesn't come from nowhere. So where does it come from? And does that seal the deal? No, but it's a strand of evidence that has not, I think, lately at least, been given its fair weight.
Mm-hmm. Now, we did talk a little bit about the Proto-Evangelium of James. So there could be some people out there who are saying, Proto-Evangelium of James, what is that exactly?
It's a later document. It's a 2nd century document that purports to give us the birth and childhood of Jesus. And much of it kind of tracks alongside the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, but fills in a lot of the details in a fanciful kind of way. So it's from the Proto-Evangelium of James that we get the names of Mary's parents, Anna and Joachim. And Mary, we read in that document, was a promised child, much like Isaac in the Old Testament, or John the Baptist in the New, a child promised to a righteous barren couple. And the document as a whole kind of functions to take Mary away from the rest of the human community, to make her absolutely unique. And certainly, in the Proto-Evangelium of James, her virginity is part of that. Mm-hmm. But we get some wild and wacky stuff going on there. Like, Mary was raised in a ceremonially pure room for a while, almost like a girl in the plastic bubble. And then she was taken by torchlight procession to the temple, where she stayed until she was 12. And while she was in the temple, she was fed by birds who brought her food, like Elijah in the wilderness. And so just some really wacky stuff going on there. And I think, St. Jerome, in his really caustic rejection of the document as a collection of fables, I think he's right to do it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the writer of the Proto-Evangelium of James, it's hard to get into a writer's head, of course. Do you think the writer knew that do you think the writer was intending to write history, or was he trying to give like a just so story, more for entertainment purposes or not, or what?
I have, excuse me, I have no idea what's going on in his head. But it's interesting to me that he's doing something, I think, that's a pretty natural thing to do with a person that has captivated our imaginations. We want to know as much about them as possible. Mm-hmm. And, we know so little about Jesus. His childhood kind of ends at Luke 4. And then when he reappears again, he's grown up. His childhood ends at age 12. And between infancy and age 12, we don't know anything. And then we have this Jesus at the temple, age 12, and then from 12 to 30, we don't know anything. And so, in a kind of environment where this person has so captured the hearts and imaginations of growing groups of people, people are going to want to know more about them. People are going to ask, I wonder what it was like when, kinds of questions. Mm-hmm. And in that kind of milieu, those stories grow up. And so I don't think the writer of the Proto-Evangelium is inventing things. I think he's documenting stories that were circulating at the time. But they are so out of harmony with what's going on in the Gospels themselves that I think we're quite right to say these are legendary accretions that grow up after centuries or after many decades. These are not. This is not history.
Yeah. When my wife and I talk about these kinds of things, I mean, I tell her that I do get very suspicious of many of these things that come after the Gospels and such, after the biblical record. Because, I mean, I think about, for instance, the Acts of Paul and Thecla, which many of the church fathers did treat seriously. I say, I mean, you have in this account, Thecla, for instance, a woman who hears a message from Paul and encourages her to not get married, which is the exact opposite of what Paul says in the epistles, and she ends up being baptized in a pool by herself, a pool of man-eating seals. I mean, this really does not seem to speak of history.
No.
And,
No, I think you're right, and I think there's all kinds of Johnny Carson would say weird and wonderful stuff in early Christian apocryphal writing that really just does represent fictionalizations and additions and filling in the gaps in the stories, and we can read them and appreciate them as kind of capturing a mindset of a time, and I think we do similar things today when we fictionalize stories. You think of the Jesus movie or the Greatest Story Ever Told or the Passion of the Christ. I mean, all of those movies fill in the gaps that are left in the Gospels, and they have to.
There's a popular series written several years ago, I remember, the Joshua series, about, I think, Rabbi Joseph Gerzon, who wrote it, about a man who'd come to a town named Joshua, and he was a simple carpenter and such, and you went through and you could tell he's writing about Jesus, and he's writing an account about what it would be like if Jesus came to these towns and such today. And I mean, that's the kind of thing that we would write today. I mean, of course, no, if I decided to write a story like that, I wouldn't dare go out and say, by the way, put this story on the same level of scripture. Absolutely not. Just be saying, here's what I think it would be like if Jesus was here today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you've got something similar going on there. I think the Protevangelium is really a valuable document in terms of showing us one stream of early Christian belief, telling us the kinds of stories early Christians told each other about the childhood of Jesus. But I don't think it's historically valuable.
I have one that's thing along these lines of when we talk about Mary and the issue of virginity and such. Could it be also that maybe these things of those girls, really the early church didn't have the most positive view of sexuality like we do today? I mean, I think even Tertullian said the highest form of sexuality such was to be married and still remain celibate. I mean, is that a possibility?
Well, certainly, as Christian asceticism begins to take off in the 4th century, certainly Mary comes to be a model for the ascetic life, both for men and for women. So, absolutely, that feeds into it as well. And it's, certainly Ambrose's defense of the perpetual virginity of Mary is all about Mary as the model Christian ascetic. Jerome is far more interested in, talking about the scriptures and trying to figure out what the scriptures really teach. But for Ambrose, there's a much more pastoral, practical issue at stake, and it has to do with the growing Christian ascetic movement that he thinks is highly valuable. And honestly, I mean, it's really easy 2,000 years on to chide the early Christians for having a deficient view of sex, but goodness me, I mean, given the sexually soaked and gross culture from which they'd been converted, and
which we're turning into.
Yeah. I mean, how could it be otherwise? Early Christian views of marriage and of asceticism were greeted, or celibacy, I should say, were greeted with joy by women, because it meant they were people who to borrow from the Me Too movement, who could withhold consent, in a way that they could not in pre-Christian Rome. They were simply pieces of property. So, of course, they were deeply suspicious of sex, but the sex of which they were deeply suspicious was not a view of sexuality that treated them as equals. It treated them as property and playthings, and so the rejection of it was quite understandable.
Now that's well, actually, before we move into the medieval period, I'll go ahead at this point and start talking about donations and such, because we're getting near the end of the year. End of the year giving is upon us, and I do really appreciate your support. And some of you give us some great one-time gifts and such. Awesome. God bless you. That's wonderful. What really helps us the most, though, is if you become a monthly donor, so that sends a regular amount we can depend on and such, and that means so much to us. Now, if you want to do that, what you do, you go to my website, deeperwatersapologetics.com, and there's a link on the side that says help support the work of Deeper Waters Christian Ministries. Okay, you click on the sublink in there, and you get taken to the ministry of Risen Jesus. Wait, have you gone to the right place? Is there a mistake in my website? Nope. You have gone to the right place, dear. As I'd said earlier, I talked to my father-in-law, and that's Mike Lacona. He and his wife who run that ministry, so Mike and his wife Debbie kind of oversee the funds for us, and Debbie is a financial accountant guru type. So you make your donation there, and then you get in touch with Mike and Debbie, or you get in touch with me or my wife Allie and say, hey, I made a donation. I want to go to Nick Peters. I want to go to Deeper Waters. We will get that donation. It will be tax deductible. You can also buy some ebooks that I have written, such as A Creed for the Ages, the Apostles' Creed in Today's Christian, or co-written, the latest Contextualizing Inerrancy, which was the sequel to one that I also co-wrote, Defining Inerrancy, or Groundless, or God and Natural Disasters, or Christian Answer to This Generation's Questions, or the Mentionables Project, which seems to be one of our most popular books out there. Now, there's also another way that you can support us. Christmas is coming up, and a lot of ladies, they would love to see jewelry in their stocking. And, maybe you would even like to be like I was for Christmas back in 2010 or 2009 and say, I think this Christmas I'm going to pop the question, which I did on Christmas Eve of 2009. Well, you need a ring to do that. So what you can do, you can buy from our jewelry store at Premier Jewelers Fair. My friend Lena Klester runs that. If you want to know how to do that more, if you're not sure, just ask me or ask her, and I'll help get things taken care of for you and such, so you can purchase. But you can purchase something for that lady in your life, and whatever you purchase on that site through us, 25% of it goes to Deeper Waters. So if you're planning on buying some jewelry, why not do it that way and support the ministry at the same time? And guys, you know what I've always told you about this. You can buy something special for that lady in your life to make up for that screw-up that you recently did with her, or you can buy something special for that lady in your life to make up for that screw-up that I know you're going to make with her. Speak from experience on both lines. I've made the screw-ups, and I know I'm going to make even more of them. And if you can't do any of these, please at least go on iTunes and leave a positive review. Tell people about the Deeper Waters podcast. share it with friends, and get the word out there. I can't tell you how much I would appreciate this kind of thing. Now, Dr. Perry, do you have an organization or a charity you'd like to see people donate to?
I don't actually. I'm a church minister. I have a very generous congregation who looks after my financial needs. So, I'd encourage your listeners to give to your ministry. I think you're doing good work, Nick. But my needs are looked after.
Yeah, thank you very much. And no, I don't ask my guests to say things like that, if you're wondering. I appreciate the generosity here, and I'm very pleased to hear that there is a church that's making sure its pastor is being taken care of. And with a pastor who's actually doing scholarly research. We need more of that out there.
Well, that's very kind of you to say.
Now let's go into the medieval period, which has one of my very favorite figures in church history, Thomas Aquinas, a great thinker who I base so much of my philosophy on. Now, when we do get to the medieval period, we do see a whole lot more development of Marian dogmas and such, and feasts are about Mary, and feasts celebrating the conception of Jesus and such. So, give us a little snapshot of the medieval period.
Well, I mean, the medieval period is really interesting. One of the things I wanted to do in my book was kind of move people away from the notion that everything was, with respect to Mary, really minimal until the Dark Ages. And it was only in the medieval era that all the accretions that we don't like came in. And in fact, that's not true. Whatever the medievals did, rightly or wrongly, they got from the fathers, or at least from those fathers to which they had access. And, by large measure in the West, that was Augustine and, a few others as well, but it was largely Augustine. And the seeds, if you want, of all the stuff that we don't like or that we balk at or we disagree with, the seeds of that is all there in the fathers, and the medievals simply kind of revel in figuring out the logical implications of it to the most minute degree. So, for example, as far as I know, I've not found medieval theologians debating how many angels could dance on the head of a pin.
Yeah, that's a myth that the scholastics came up about with them.
Yeah, but they certainly debated really intricate questions. Did Jesus own his own clothes or not? Was a big one for early Franciscans, because if Jesus owned his own clothes, then there would be some permission for private property. So anything that the medievals did, for all the things they did, one of the things they were not was inventive. They were about having received kind of the infrastructure in the scriptures, again, the scriptures to which they had access. Having received the infrastructure in the scriptures and in the fathers, they went about kind of constructing the building around that scaffolding or around that infrastructure as best they could. And so I wanted to read them as positively as I could. But again, I mean, there's some wild and wacky stuff in the medievals for sure.
It's interesting that you mentioned Augustine, I think, because I think pretty much everyone tries to lay claim to Augustine. The Orthodox try and say, he's one of ours. Protestants say, he's one of ours. And the Catholics say, he's one of ours. Everyone seems to hold to Augustine in some way.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, certainly that's the case. I mean, he's far more a Western father than an Eastern one. I mean, in part because of language. He writes in Latin. But also, because the East simply doesn't share in some kind of key themes in Augustine. the Eastern Church is very suspicious of Augustine's doctrine of original sin. And that's important in Marian debates because the dogma that becomes the Immaculate Conception in 1854 simply doesn't make sense to Eastern Christians, to Orthodox Christians with a capital O, because it's predicated upon a uniquely Western understanding of original sin that simply isn't present in the East. So the East can have a very full, rich, wild vocabulary for Mary in terms of piety and devotion, and yet be quite comfortable with things like saying Mary made mistakes or whatever, because they don't have this strong view of original sin that's unique to the Western Church and which we get from Augustine.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, for instance, they wouldn't have a problem with, say, Mary being a sinner who needed to be saved, right?
Well, I mean, yes and no. Does Mary share in her in the salvation brought by Jesus? Yes, absolutely. But at the same time, as the Theotokos, she is uniquely graced for a role that is uniquely hers, and so the East and the West have no trouble saying that Mary is higher than the cherubim and the seraphim. And that phrase comes up in a Christmas hymn that's sung in Protestant churches too, at least older ones. Ye watchers and ye holy ones, right? Oh, higher than the seraphim, oh, higher than the cherubim, sing his praises, hallelujah. It's a verse about Mary giving praise to Jesus. So they can be quite. The East can be quite full with their Marian piety, and yet not hang as much on it theologically as the West does, because they don't have this notion of original sin means sharing in Adam's guilt. For the East, original sin simply means susceptibility to mortality. And they don't. The East doesn't speak of Mary dying. They will speak of Mary falling asleep. But they don't have the dogma of the Assumption or the dogma of the Immaculate Conception the same way that the West does, because they simply don't have that Augustinian frame of reference out of which that dogma comes.
Now, of course, it's very interesting to try and take about 1,000 years of church history and put it in about 5 or 10 minutes or so. So definitely, and when there is a whole lot more said in Dr. Perry's book about this, and yes, at the end of the show, I'm going to be telling you how you can get your hands on this book, and it is a very good one to read. But we also do have development of doctrines such as, Mary as a co-redemptrix and such, and we have debates on, say, the ascension of Mary, the assumption of Mary, I think, and such. And those do also take place in the medieval period, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, then we're going to move ahead, and some of my listeners would say, the Protestant Reformation, where once again common sense took over and people returned to biblical views and such. And, of course, it doesn't mean, though, that we have to agree with everything the Protestant reformers said and such. I remember watching a video someone once sent me about N.T. Wright when he came out with his view on justification. And Al Mohler talking with several others about it. It was an hour-long video. Of course, N.T. Wright wasn't there to defend his views and such. And one line that really stuck out at me was some guy there, I don't know who he was, but he said, N.T. Wright may have he's found something in the scriptures, but he's going against the tradition. And I'm sitting there thinking, isn't that kind of what the Reformation was all about to begin with?
You know what? I've had very similar kind of reactions with Tom Wright in particular. Some people sometimes seem more interested in defending Martin Luther than in being really clear on what Paul says. So yeah, I get you. Absolutely.
So when we look at the reformers, I mean, I do agree with you that at the start they did seem to hold still a lot of the Marian doctrines and such as perpetual virginity and such. But I do think Martin Luther, for instance, later on, did look and say, okay, I'm starting to see some problems here with things like, say, praying to the saints and to Mary and things like that. Am I right?
Well, yeah, I mean, Luther's big thing, it was not so much the intercession of the saints that was problematic. It was the idea that Christ was the angry judge. And you know, the way around the angry judge was to appeal to his merciful mother. It was, and that's not a dogma or a doctrine in the Catholic Church, but it does represent a pretty well established piety, certainly in Luther's time and in Luther's place. And I mean, it predates him too. I mean, you can find it in the prayers of Anselm, for example. And it's that really drives him, and it drives him because it obscures the gospel, which is Jesus is the merciful Savior. And so anything in terms of piety that obscures the centrality of the grace of God displayed on the cross of Jesus, I mean, that's what drives Luther crazy. And the problem with the cult of the saints in Luther's time was not so much the idea that the saints were closer to God, and so seeking the invocation of a saint would be a good thing to do. I mean, if we have time, we can talk about that later if you want. The problem was that whole understanding of piety had come to rest on a really deficient understanding of Jesus, in which Jesus was just waiting for a reason to damn you. And the only way to get around angry Jesus was appeal to his mother. And, you know, of course, that drove Luther crazy for all kinds of reasons. But, you know, I'd like to say that would drive today, anyway, any really thoughtful Catholic crazy, too. You know, because and not having anything to do with Mary, but because it's Christologically just so very wrong and destructive.
Yeah, I know that the priest of the Orthodox Church my wife attends, he's actually left a review of my show on iTunes, so he's listened. In fact, he's been a guest on my show before in Dialogue with a Protestant. And I'm pretty sure if he heard that kind of thing, he'd say, hey, Martin Luther, I'm right there with you, brother. Oh,
yeah. You know, and that's the thing. Like, when we started talking, you notice I said, you know, Mary really comes to the fore in the third generation of the Reformation. When she comes up in the first two generations, with Luther and with Calvin, it's not doctrine, it's piety. It's any kind of piety that elevates Mary to the level of Jesus that the reformers have in their sights. They're not worried about Marian doctrine yet. They get there, but it's later on. It's any kind of view of Mary that presents her as a way around Jesus, or as more merciful than Jesus, or as a safer savior than Jesus, anything like that, which is prevalent in the late medieval era, absolutely, but not official Catholic teaching. It's that they want to get rid of. And you know, later on in the 19th century, Cardinal Newman will say stuff like that makes my skin crawl. So a rejection of that kind of piety is not a peculiarly Protestant thing, but it starts off with the Reformation for sure.
Yeah, and I do have my own concerns. I mean, I have no problem saying the saints pray for us and such. That doesn't bother me because I think, hey, they are and such. My concern is, I think, you know, if we're praying to them, it almost is really, in my mind, putting them on a level as Jesus and such. And I think even Origen in church history said Christians pray to God alone. And I think Martin Luther, he did start developing some of those same concerns, didn't he?
Well, yeah. My only concern here is to highlight the context. right?
Hmm.
He rejects the invocation of the saints because it's resting on a deficient Christology, and it's the Christology that's more of a driving concern for him. Anything that obscures Christ as the merciful, gracious Savior who welcomes and forgives and pardons sinners on the basis of his sacrifice on the cross, anything that obscures that is rejected. It's not that he's considered the theology of saintly mediation and rejects it. It's because there's a whole web of piety in there that obscures the face of Christ. That's what really makes Luther intensely angry.
Yeah, I have the same sort of problem with the Orthodox Church, and I hear things like through the intercessions of your mother and such, and I'm usually thinking, Jesus alone, I think, is enough to make intercessions for me. I mean, as a Protestant, I just get that natural inclination to think, I think we kind of could be going on dangerous waters here a little bit.
Yeah, it may be. I mean, it depends on what's going on between your ears, I think, when you do that. I have no trouble asking my friends who are, have not departed this life to pray for me. And it seems to me invoking the saints, if you're going to do it, and I'm not suggesting you do, but if you're going to do it, it's an analogous kind of thing. And the saints are even closer to God than we are. So who wouldn't want to ask for them to pray for us? In terms of the unity of the church across the barrier of death, I think that's the only way you can justify it. It's not a question of praying to them as though they're little gods. So certainly it can look like that, and I have no doubt that in some cases that is exactly what's going on, and that's deeply problematic.
Yeah, at the same time, I keep thinking when my wife talks about these kinds of things, such I say, hon, this is an advantage I think I do have as a Protestant, because I can go to the Orthodox and say, you got some doctrines here. I think some of them are right. I think some of them are wrong. And I don't have to agree with all of them. And I can do the exact same thing with the Catholics. I can say, any belief you've got right that I think is true, I can subsume it under the Protestant idea very easily, and it works just fine.
Sure.
Now let's move on past the Reformation period. And then we get into the area, let's call it the era of skepticism and such. And this is where we have people like David Strauss and Schleiermacher and others who are really starting to really question a whole lot about Jesus. And that includes Mary, right?
Yeah. Well, as the various quests of the historical Jesus get rolling, Mary gets kind of clobbered in those quests too. She really fades into the background, and she really, certainly theologically, gets lost. Even in conservative Protestants. She's kind of trotted out as a guarantee of the humanity of Christ, and then nothing more is ever said. And we end up with a really truncated view of Mary. Certainly, we go so far as saying an anemic view of Mary that simply doesn't reflect not simply the whole of small c Catholic tradition, but doesn't reflect what's going on in the scriptures themselves. I know we've left the reformers behind, but I really like the warning of Erasmus in his letter from Mary, that kind of satirical letter, when she says to the reformer Glaucoplatus, she says, be careful. You've gotten rid of the saints, but if you get rid of me, I'll take my son with me. I don't think it's an accident that an anemic view of Mary goes hand in glove with an anemic view of the incarnation. In the second half of the 20th century, the recovery of a really robust doctrine of the incarnation led by Karl Barth, it comes along with his ringing defense of the Theotokos as a Christologically necessary term. Mary and Jesus come together. And if you get rid of the mother, I think Erasmus is right, she takes her son with her. And you end up with a pretty impoverished, moralistic Christianity.
At the same time, Karl Barth, I think, was still thoroughly Protestant.
Oh, absolutely.
In his approach. And I think something I read in Richard Schink's book, I did interview last week, is that he actually said, I'm not too keen on Mariology, but maybe we should also have a Josephology, because Joseph certainly took on a whole lot by agreeing to be Mary's husband after everything.
Yeah. I'm quite taken with Saint Joseph as kind of the patron saint of the men who get up and go to work and do their duty to take the best care of their family as they possibly can, and otherwise don't say very much. So I think there is room for a recovery of Saint Joseph in our thinking as well.
Now, I'd say a huge majority of people listening to my show, since this is an apologetics podcast, would have an interest in making defenses of biblical doctrines and such. How should we be approaching Mary if we're good Protestants and such?
Well, I think we would want as scripturally faithful Christians, I think we should want to be true to the whole testimony of the Scriptures with respect to Mary. I'd be happy with that. And that means we need to do more than trot her out in December and pack her up with the Christmas decorations on January 3rd. Luke presents her as a model disciple who accepts the word of God both with her heart and with her body. And so in some way she functions as an example of faithfulness for believers. I think she's a symbolic referent in the later New Testament for the people of God. So, in how we think about the church, how we think about our work as the body of Christ, as those who are called out by our union with Christ to engage in his mission, there has to be a Marian element in those reflections. Or we end up with an inadequate doctrine of the church, not because, Mary's so great, but because we've left out part of the scriptural witness. And so I'd start with that. Let's commit ourselves to thinking through really carefully what Mary in the New Testament is doing, how she works in the New Testament for Luke or for John or for the Revelator or for whomever, and how does that continue our theological reflections today? I think we're being our authentically Protestant selves in doing that. And I think the challenge that I came to in writing the book was that Protestants weren't saying things where the Bible was, and that's problematic. So let's do that together. Let's take the whole of the scriptural witness with respect to Mary into our hearts and into our minds, and begin to think it through and see what its implications are. So yeah, I'd be happy if people just started there.
I'm remembering someone saying that about how you don't want to raise your hands in a church service and such because somebody might think you're Pentecostal or something. in a more conservative church. Now, I think some of my Protestants are going to be saying, I'm not sure we should be doing this because somebody might think we're Catholic or Orthodox. I mean, there seems to be one danger in this mind that if you go and you start accepting this, by God, you're on the pathway to the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, and you better choose one of them.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I don't want to steer other people's faith journeys. That's not my business. Yeah. I think if you're a committed Protestant, if you're committed to sola scriptura, then, you got to speak where the Bible speaks.
Mm-hmm.
And if the Bible presents the mother of Jesus as a model disciple, which she is in the Gospel of Luke, I think that's textually, I think that's beyond arguing. And yet, Mary as an example doesn't figure into your own personal devotion, your own discipleship, your own churchmanship even, then you're failing to say something which the Bible itself says. So you're not being true to sola scriptura, not by saying more than the scriptures do, which is what we accuse the Catholics of doing, but by saying less than they do. Right? And that's, if you want, it's a sin in the equal but opposite direction.
Yeah, I think for like if we talk about, say, like perpetual virginity, I think we could say it might make sense if, for instance, a Protestant like I goes next to the text and says, I think it's pretty clear to me from a historical or scholarly basis of sorts that the other people that are called Jesus' brothers are children of Mary and such. Now, hypothetically, I could be wrong about that, of course, but that is at least going back to the scriptures and saying, okay, I'm getting my doctrine from the scriptures, and this is what I see. I mean, I think part of the danger is when we do go back to the scripture, there really isn't too much about Mary. At the same time, I think the Catholics do have a point with us when they say that I'll represent Mary as, say, just a divine incubator, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair charge.
So let's suppose a whole Protestant family is gathered together, and there is a child there, and this child wants to know what makes Mary so special. What should we even say? And especially if this is a small child, how do we even explain something such as what it means that Mary had a virgin birth?
I think you say she's special because out of all the races in the world, God chose one. And out of all the women in that race, God chose one. And from that woman, he brought forth the Savior of the world. And that means she's a very special lady. And we ought to, reverence her because of the absolutely unique place that Providence has given her in the plan of salvation. I think that's where you start. I think a child can understand that. You might need to use simpler language depending on how old the child is, but I think that's where you start.
Scott McKnight in his book *The Real Mary* even suggested, and I did get some pushbacks from Protestants when I suggested that perhaps one day a year at least in church, maybe around Christmas time, we should even have an Honor Mary Day, where we take a look at Mary and celebrate her life and what she did. I remember sharing this in a theological forum, and one immediate responses was, no. What would you think of an Honor Mary Day in a Protestant church?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit snarky, Nick, but with good intention. We're coming up to the third Sunday of Advent, where the gospel reading is the Magnificat. I mean, that is the Sunday that you're looking for, right there.
Yep.
We don't have to invent an Honor Mary Sunday because we already have it. Even in Protestant churches. She's the one who basically sang the entire Old Testament narrative in her Magnificat. And that's the scripture reading for that day. And that's why we reverence her. She, behold, from now on, all generations will call me blessed. Why? Because in her, God's dealings with Israel comes to its climax, because in her heart and in her womb, she carries the word of God. Right? And so yeah, I mean, McKnight is right. Have an Honor Mary Sunday, but we already have one. It's called the third Sunday of Advent. And, that's the day to do it.
Keep in mind, of course, that it reminds this old joke about the differences between how Protestants view the creeds and confessions of the church, that Anglicans like yourself could hold to the first 7 creeds and councils, I think it's said, and all these things that come with it and such. When you get down to the other end, the extreme, which same as poking fun, because the church I attend as a church is more along the lines of this tradition, where it says, there's the Baptist tradition, it says, what creeds?
Yeah.
And go on from there.
Yeah. The ironic thing is that, so often those churches end up kind of reinventing the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And, here's a time when you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's already a wealth of biblical resources available to us. And this is a very natural time of year in which to do it, because whether we observe Advent or not as a season in the church year, we are getting ready for Christmas. It's a natural time to do it. So, you don't need to be creative. You just need to borrow a little bit.
And since I'm sure many of my listeners are probably evangelical Protestants and such, how should this affect our dialogues when we talk with people who are Catholic and Orthodox? And we could kind of say vice versa. If Catholics and Orthodox hear this, where do we go from in our dialogues amongst the branches from here?
Well, the wonderful thing about dialogue, if you're serious about it, is you don't know where it's going to end up.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe that's a place to start for Protestants is don't presume where you're going to end.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing I would say is if you're talking to a serious Catholic or Orthodox Christian, even if you demur from whatever it is you're talking about, whether it's the Immaculate Conception or the Bodily Assumption or Invocation of the Saints or the title Co-Redemptrix, which is a thorny title for sure. Be very, very careful how you phrase your objection, because in a very real and profound way, you're talking about somebody's mother. And nobody wants to hear their mother insulted.
Mm-hmm.
So you want the pushback to be thoughtful. You want the pushback to be engaging. You want the pushback to be about what actually matters. And so keep that in mind when you're phrasing your objections. You don't want to phrase them in such a way that it sounds like you're being disrespectful to the mother of Jesus. And you know what? Sometimes we the ways in which we speak really are, I think, disrespectful to the mother of Jesus. And we don't hear that because we don't have any kind of Marian piety to draw from. But our Catholic friends certainly do hear that, and that just it sends things down the wrong path before we even started.
Mm-hmm. Well, we really don't have enough time now to get into another question, but I do thank you for coming on. Do you have a blog, a website, an email, a way people can get in touch with you if they want to find out more about you and your work?
I don't have a whole lot of work going on right now except being a pastor, but if people want to email me, they're welcome to. My email address is my name, Timothy Scott Perry @hotmail.com. I have a Hotmail address, so it also tells you how old I am. Old fogies like me have Hotmail addresses. People can reach me there. I might take a while, but I do try to write back to anyone who writes to me.
Mm-hmm. And that includes when you wrote back to me.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. The book is Mary for Evangelicals. I'm bringing it up right now to see what price is. It is out of print right now, but that doesn't mean you can't buy it. You can go through Amazon and buy it. Right now on Amazon, it looks like it's only in paperback here, and the price right now is $14.47. Maybe it will come out in Kindle someday. I don't know about that.
Well, if people keep buying copies, maybe InterVarsity will pick it up again. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any final thoughts for the Deeper Waters audience?
No, just apart from saying I really enjoyed our chat today, Nick, the 2 hours has flown by, and I hope there's stuff there that's useful to your listeners. I had a good time. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to have you, and hopefully we'll see you back here again
That'd be
sometime.
fun.
I'd like to remind everyone that next week we're going to have Richard Averbeck on. We're going to be talking about slavery in the Old Testament. Not so much of a pleasant topic as Mary is, but one that we need to get to. For now, I am Nick Peters, and I'm signing off.